Good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen. I want to just thank everyone for coming today, and I want to thank the conference, the event for inviting me, and it's just a privilege to be here. I was noticing I'm on the East Coast in the US, and I was noticing it's 8:30 a.m. my time, and it's 3:30 p.m. local time, and it was I was like, this is the last presentation for the day for everyone. I think there's a wrap up coming, so thank you for hanging out and joining me today. I really appreciate it. I want to talk about agile an agile coach's guide to storytelling, and I want to give you a sense for why that might be valuable and what that might look like. I also want to give you a sense for some tools or tactics for refining your storytelling. My goal at the end of this talk would be any of you who are Scrum Masters or Agile coaches of any sort, or anyone who does any, like interacts with people, maybe. So that would be all of you, I would hope, that I inspire you to think about storytelling as a communication mechanism, as probably the most powerful or a powerful communication mechanism, and inspire you to work on your storytelling for your career, for your current role, etc. So let's dive in. So storytellers, I like visualization. So I'm sharing this visualization with all of you. I like the one on the lower right. Storytelling isn't just our words, but it's our body language. I love you can almost tell there's a big idea that's coming out of that young lady's mouth. Big idea, some enthusiasm, some energy coming in, and you can see that, and that amplifies whatever message, whatever story she's telling. Um, I love the gathering around pictures on the left. When you're telling stories, a nice metaphor or a vision for you is I like folks gathering around. So for example, if you're familiar with user stories, product ownership and user stories, I think of user stories, the essence of a user story is a story. And how do you tell? It's not the reading the story, but it's what is the story of the story? What is the genesis? What is the story? And when I think about a product owner or a client or a stakeholder sharing the user story with a team, I think about the team gathering around, like gathering around the fire or gathering around and being interested in the story. And I'm not talking about little stories. I'm talking about perhaps epics or some big, sort of larger scale scope stories. But it's something we're talking about it. It's generating excitement. It's generating attention. And you can see that. The other thing is, I like music now, arguably dated music, but music nonetheless. And Crosby, Stills. There's a bunch of artists, musicians, who I think there are some wonderful storytellers in musicians and in songs. And Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, if you've ever heard about them, they were a folkish or a band in the U.S. in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I think of them as having great storytelling. Speaking of musicians, there's other musicians historically that at least resonate with me. If you've heard of any of these, Bob Dylan is someone who I think is a consummate storyteller, a lyricist, and telling stories in his lyrics. Billy Joel is one of those, the piano man. Harry Chapin is one of my favorite storytellers. Um, Tracy Chapman is a great storyteller. Fast Car. I always get moved when I hear Fast Car. Is one of her. She's telling a story in Fast Car. And Jim Croce. Uh, Beyond musicians, and what I'm trying to do is set a tone with you or make you aware that stories are all around you, if that makes sense. So we can learn from the stories that are in our universe, and we can get better as storytellers by observing that. Another place to find good storytelling, at least for me, is in the movies, animated movies, or movies in general. I think good movies for me, they resonate that they're telling a story. May have great acting, but what is the theme? What is the story? What are the compelling points of it? Up, if any of you ever saw an animated movie quite a few years ago, but I remember when Up came out and I saw it for the first time. I got emotional. Tears were coming in my eyes, and I got emotional quite, towards the end of the movie. It elicited an emotional response. It took me on a story ride. It made me reminisce about things. It increased my gratefulness for spending time with folks in my family, etc. On the lower left side is Two Wolves. If anyone's ever seen Storks, it's one of my granddaughter's favorite movies. And there's a scene in there about wolves who are forming various devices that just warms my heart and makes me smile every time. I probably replayed that part of the movie hundreds of times just to bring a smile to my face. So it's not just the broader stories, but story snippets that may resonate with us sometimes. So I want to sort of get your juices flowing, thinking about stories, at least for the next 40, whatever's remaining, 40 minutes or so, or 35 minutes. I'd like you to take a moment. I'm going to give you perhaps just 3 minutes to work on this. So if you have a piece of paper, or if you have access to a piece of paper, that would be great, electronic or physical. And I want you to sort of do some jotting down or journaling or noodling. Just have something to capture any notes that you might have. So I want you to remember. I want all of you to remember when, and I want you to look back, and it could be a childhood or a family story that stuck with you. It could be a personal or a professional story. It could be a Scrum team story. It could be a Kanban team story. Uh, a compelling news story. Nowadays, I find that news stories, real life stories, are moving me in some ways, depending on how the newscasters are casting it, but also how they're unfolding it in film on the camera and things like that. And then a movie or a play. In my history, there's certain movies that I can think back to that had a tremendous impact on me. Titanic is one. I know that sounds schmaltzy. That's a word that sounds odd, but Titanic. I haven't seen it many times, but it had an effect on me, sort of a resilient effect on me. So a movie or play. And then I want you to jot down, yeah, I want you to visualize, I want you to create a snapshot of your story, a compelling story for you. So how did it make you feel? And what was its impact on you? Not you, but on you. And how did it unfold? Any notes like for you? How did it unfold for you? So if you could take 3 minutes and just jot that down, I'm going to be quiet. Let me set my clock just so you all know that I'm not fooling you. I have a little manual clock here. So we'll set it for 3 minutes. And I want you to noodle in and create your own little story snippet. Okay? Sometimes in these workshops, people get done very quickly. If you get done quickly, do another story. Okay? Oh, you have about 30 seconds left. So wrap up some of those notes about your story. So how did it make you feel? What was its impact on you? And how did it unfold for you? Okay. That's just for you to keep. That's for you to keep as a little personal memento from this talk. So you can keep that for yourself and maybe it'll connect some dots during the talk itself. I want to switch gears and I want to talk about a book by Stephen Denning. And it's a wonderful, if you, I would recommend it. It's a good first step. At least it's one of a handful of books that I would recommend if you want to just step into storytelling in general. And as a coach, he calls it the Leader's Guide to Storytelling. He published it. It's a little dated in 2005. There's other books, The Story Factor. I would say probably skip that one, but Denning has done a nice job. He's also talked about various topics in the Agile community, but I want to. He talks about 8 narrative patterns. So when you're storytelling, I don't think you walk into a room and just tell a generic story. Like if I'm coaching a client, I don't necessarily want to talk about the trees outside unless I really want to connect them to the client's agenda. So again, there's a purpose, there's focus, there's an intentionality, there's a pre-planned nature to your storytelling. It has a point to it, it has a strategy to it, and I love the twist that Denning talks about storytelling to narrative. I actually resonate more with narrative than I do with storytelling. To me, narrative is I'm a pretty avid reader, so narratives in books really resonates well with me. So he talks about 8 narrative patterns as a storyteller. Think of these as focus points. Like this is a type of story or a focus point for your story. One focus point, and not all of these map to coaching, but most of them do. Motivating others to action without telling them to be motivated. So motivating others, using narrative to ignite action. Ignite, I love the term there. Ignite, inspire action, and implement new ideas. You could tell a story about a past team and how they were struggling with their motivation and what was the igniter for them and how they found that igniter and just you're sharing that story. You're not judging the current team or client, whoever you're coaching, but you're just sharing a coaching story. Now, the result of that is going to be potentially, if you're lucky, it's going to be motivational. You can tell stories that will build trust in you as a coach. I think of it, one of the most important things for Agile coaches is relationship building, particularly early on. Relationship building with the team, relationship building if you're coaching leaders with leaders that whoever your coaching client are, is building trust in you. And storytelling can be a really effective way to do that, to talk about a story of your failure, a story of your successes, a story of how you hold to your agile values. How do you hold to them under pressure so that members can trust your experience, they can trust your skill, they can trust that you're walking your talk. Building trust in your company, you can talk about company stories. Depending on the level of coaching, that might or might not be relevant. Transmitting, I think value stories are incredibly important. It connects to trust. I just connected it to trust. Sharing your values. Who are you? Why are you the way you are? I think one of the everyone jot this down. One of the most important stories that all of us should have is our Agile Genesis story. Or what I think of is what is our personal why for Agile? To be able to articulate that in an elevator pitch format in 2 or 3 minutes. If someone stops you professionally in your company, why are you so passionate about Agile? You should be able to articulate your why, your powerful, compelling why story. How did you get there? Now, maybe you have a longer version of it, but you have a shorter version of it as well. And part of that could be transmitting your values, getting others working together, talking about what collaboration looks like, sharing stories about effective collaboration as an inspiration or even a view of what that might look like. Sharing knowledge, sharing knowledge in story format. When I'm coaching, I typically try not to say the Scrum Guide says this, so do it by the Scrum Guide. I try. No, I do a pretty good job. Instead of giving folks my clients prescriptive guidance, the book says this. Occasionally I'll say that, or the model is this way. I'll talk about stories of teams and individuals implementing those things and what they found useful and what they didn't. So sharing the knowledge, but in a way that unfolds with stories. And if I didn't have the story, I would be more prescriptive. if that makes sense to everyone. So the storytelling aspect of it actually, I think, connects more, or it lightens my prescriptiveness. Taming the grapevine, probably not that relevant. And then creating and sharing your vision, I think, is important as a coach. What is your vision? Particularly for enterprise or organizational level coaches who are coaching leaders, is having some, co-creating a vision with your sponsors or your stakeholders would be important. But again, going back, Denning does a great job. I want you to think narrative patterns and going in, before you tell your story, think about which pattern are you going, which pattern is going to drive it? What type of story are you going to tell? And it doesn't have to follow into these, but be intentional about there's a point. I'm not just going to be this generic storyteller and people are going to think, like my grandfather tells stories and he tells them over and over again, and they come, and you don't want to become that kind of a storyteller. You want to become a more focused storyteller. Steve Jobs, I love this quote from him: the most powerful person in the world. I'd actually say the most powerful person in the room, the most powerful person in the team, the most powerful person. I'm not I'm not promoting the person. The most powerful person in the organization, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, agenda of an entire generation to come. I know that sounds grandiose, but don't react to that. It really is true. Storytelling is a powerful paradigm of communication. There's arguments that say it is the most historically throughout mankind, the storytellers, the shamans who were sharing stories that passed down generations. Stories was the format for that. There's really, you can see that in the historical record, that storytelling can be incredibly powerful. And I think that's what Jobs is emoting. So I want you to envision yourself as a coach or as a scrum master or as a leader, right? Yes, you are those roles, but what you can add as a skill is, how do I bring complementary storytelling in to activate my role, to make me more effective in that role that I'm in? I want to switch gears and talk about some storytelling basics. I don't know if any of you've ever heard of the Oreo cookie, or there's different the sandwich. It's tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, then tell them what you told them. It's an incredibly dated heuristic, but it's very valuable today. I remind myself about it. I call it the Oreo cookie. If you know what Oreo cookies are, or any cookie, they have a sandwich in between. So tell them that. Crossing Pareto, I think a mistake that storytellers make sometimes, some storytellers, independent of your experience, is you're trying to tell the story for the whole audience. You're trying to resonate with 100% of the people. And I think there's nothing wrong with resonating with 100% of the people, but the point is, try to find the middle. Because my experience is your story will never resonate with everyone, but you're trying to hit the majority, that crossing the chasm of the majority of the attendees. Connect to your audience, read your audience, pay attention to your audience. One of the things that's happening now, please, no one react. No one react to me at all. But no one's camera is on. So I'm getting no feedback. I'm getting no feedback from the audience. So I'm trying to read the audience, and all I'm seeing is, thank you, Enrico. But I wasn't trying to make you do that. But I appreciate it. But now I have one person in the audience that I can actually read his body language. If I tell a joke and if he smiles, I know it's effective. If I tell a joke and he cries, I know that I have some adjustmts to make in my delivery or in my content, etc. So connecting to the audience, reading the audience, it's incredibly important to read what's going on with the audience and make, not just read them, but you're making adjustments to what's going on. Is the story landing? Is it not landing? Humor. I've been trying to apply humor in my talk so far a little bit. So can you? But it's your own humor. There is no one size fits all for humor. Your jokes, etc. I have a tendency to do dad jokes. In the U.S., we call them dad jokes. They're wry wry aged joke, and that works for me, and I try to inject that. Visualization, again, hand movement, I'm trying to move there. Let your points emerge. It's sometimes people want to tell the story and say, hey, this is the point, So Alexander, I'm going to tell you a story, and after this story, you're going to love Agile. Right. Well, I didn't give Alexander any opportunity to think for himself. I told him what the result of the story is going to be. No, don't do that. Let Alexander come to his own conclusions. Let the point of your stories emerge. It may hit some people and it may not hit some people. That's fine. It may hit them now and it may hit them later, and that's fine. So all of that, be transparent, be yourself. Early in my career, if any of you know, there's a consultant in our Agile space called Joanna Rothman. And Joanna Rothman, she's been in the space for a long time. And when I first started doing public speaking, I started acting like Joanna. She was a role model for me. So when I did presentations, I presented just like Joanna did it. And what I noticed is it didn't work really well. It didn't work as well as it did for Joanna. So very quickly, and I'm thankful for this, very quickly I realized I needed to find my voice. I needed to find my style. So in your storytelling, you want to find your style and read what's effective from the audience and amplify what's working and stay away from what's not. The other thing that complements the narratives, remember those narratives? That we were talking about, the 8 narrative patterns. I I want you to also think about complementing that. I want you to think about the types of stories and flows. So, in this is just an extension of that thought. So, for example, principle stories. You can tell a Scrum principles. You could have a story that where you talk about courage. So, for example, Suruchi, might have a story from a team, and that team showed wonderful courage, and you can share that story with other teams when you're talking about that value, that Scrum value. Not to tell them exactly what it is, but to show them they value in action via the form of a story. That can be very effective. Who am I stories? As an agile coach, hopefully you go in and introduce yourself. You don't just walk in the door and say, I'm your scrum master, I'm your coach, and I'm going to coach you really well, like right now. Hopefully there's an introductory period or a relationship building period. And part of that is, why am I here stories, or why should you care stories? Or, you can have some fun. I know what you're thinking stories might be a story sometimes. I like Phoenix Rising stories. Everyone know what I mean by a Phoenix Rising? Failure, a Phoenix rising from the ashes. I love the metaphor of that. A team failed. Let me tell you, Maria, there was a team, Bob Galen. It was a miserable Scrum team. It didn't do very well. They only delivered a half of a story point per sprint. It was sad. And then suddenly, Maria Grohl came in as the Scrum Master coach, and the sky opened up and the sun shone. Unicorns. I think there were unicorns at the time, and the team's velocity. I'm kidding, everyone. Just ballooned into something, and it was miraculous what happened. So that's an example of a Phoenix Rising story. The more of those you have to collect these things. Does everyone get that? You have to collect the ideas in your journey. You want to jot down, oh, there was a neat event. Maybe I can turn that into a story. I call them story snippets or story ideas. They don't just pop up. I like to capture them along your journey. That's why I like journaling as a way of capturing my little story ideas and then developing them over time. Teaching stories, etc. You get the flow. You get the sort of the idea. Have an intent. It's not a story, but it's not a goal. It's more of a theme or a pattern that you want to look for. This is what I was talking about earlier too. You want to become adept at adjusting. This is much easier face-to-face, in-person events. It's easy to do if you can get cameras on, if you're doing virtual, but it's sensing and targeting your audience. What's working? It's what I was talking about with Enrico. What's not? Asking questions and shows of hands and seeing. That's one of the things I miss in face-to-face discussions when I've done keynotes, and I'm trying to get a sense for the audience. Where is the audience? And you can do that very quickly in questions, some generic questions, and a show of hands. Now there are some electronic tools you can use for that, but I find it a little bit easier and quicker to do it face-to-face. But I'll do that. But again, what you're doing is sensing, where is my audience? What are they interested in? How am I going to approach them? There's no algorithm, but you're doing some sensing. Embellishing. I want to give you all permission. Someone asked me in a conference once, does the story have to be true? And I was taken aback. I'm like, no, I don't know. Is it, most of my stories are true, but I embellish them. I embellish the heck out of them to make a point. Does that resonate with everyone? So I don't lie, I don't make things up, but at the same time, I'll embellish stories in a positive way to get the point across. So embellishing, exaggerating. You see that in my presentation style sometimes. Getting excited about something, having emotion in your story can be very helpful. Pausing. How is this working? All I see is Enrico, Alexander, and Maria. How is this working for all of you? Could you give me some thumbs? What do you think? Is it working so far? Alexander, oh, I didn't get Alexander yet. I have to work on Alexander. Oh, no, I did get a thumb. I did. All right. But everyone, so I'm pausing and I'm canvassing. So you can, and then move on to the next thing. Make your points. If you have an important point, one thing that I heard someone say, I forget who it was a coach. No, it was a leader. It was an Agile leader. And it was he or she, I don't remember who it was, but they said, well, I told the story in an all hands meeting, right? I made the point once in an all hands meeting in a PowerPoint. It was on the PowerPoint deck, Bob, and I showed it to the whole team. And everyone nodded their Zoom screens. And so why do I have to say it again? I said it once, and I'm like, you don't understand. Storytelling, you have to say it over and over again. Does this make sense? To make your points, you may repeat your points, you may repeat your stories until people receive them completely. So one time is not enough. So if you have an important point in your story, say it once, twice, three times. Let it land. Let it land. I want you all to be thinking about the arc of a story. This goes back to the Oreo cookie, or the beginning, the middle, and the end. You with me? The beginning, how do you set the stage? What is the sandwich? What is in the middle? And then what is the drop the mic moment? What's the big reveal? What's the point at the end? So how do I open? How do I fill in the blanks? And then how do I land? How do I drop the mic on this? And there's different things, but when you're constructing a story, think in those terms. When I'm crafting a story idea, preparing to tell a story, I actually start at the end, if that makes sense to everyone. I think about what is the one thing I want people to remember in this story? What is the drop the mic moment? What if they forget everything else about me? Everyone, what I wanted you to remember is my suspenders. So hopefully, if you don't remember any of the words, hopefully the one thing I wanted you to, I'm kidding. The one thing I wanted you to remember is that he's wearing red suspenders. or, or, or there's other names for these things, but in the US we call them suspenders. So no, what is the key takeaway? Then I like to go back to the opening moves, to the beginning, and say, how do I set the stage to land, to drop the mic? What's the best way for me to open things up so that I can drop the mic at the end? And then I fill in between those. So how do I want to close? What's the big thing? What's the message? What's the point? How do I set the stage for that? And then connect the dots. And you could do it linearly if you want, but that's just my preference for constructing it. But I'm thinking about those three aspects of the story arc. So the story has an intent. You don't just ramble in. You think about opening moves, middle game, and end game. Go ahead, Maria. You have your hand up. You have to unmute if you can. I don't know if you can unmute. Maybe I can. Oh, can I unmute you? Let's see if I have the power.
I made the power already. Sorry.
All right, Maria?
Okay, now I'm just wondering what TTWYGTTD means.
Good question. I'm sorry. I should tell them what you're going to tell them. And then at the end, tell them what you told them. It's that cookie. And I smile about it, but it's incredibly effective. Everyone with me? It's when in doubt, that Oreo cookie is a wonderful model. There's a reason why it's been resilient over time. The other thing is you're repeating. Everyone with me? Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. You're amplifying. It gives you an opportunity to amplify the important bits of your narrative. Any other questions? Let me do a time check. Oh, all right, cool. I'm a little behind time, everyone. Not too much. So I want you to, there's something called the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel, which is a framework or a model for coaching. And the reason I'm bringing it up is I wanted to drill down into storytelling and talk about storytelling from a few competencies perspective, if this makes sense to everyone. Meaning I think the stories are different depending on if I'm in coaching stance versus facilitation stance versus mentoring stance. I'm just going to use those terms. I think the storytelling would be slightly different. So I want to give you some examples of being flexible or nimble in your storytelling on a stance basis. But again, it's storytelling is the point. So for example, self-mastery is the middle of the wheel. Self-awareness, self-mastery, competency, inside-out coaching. It's the axle, it's the center of the growth wheel. So it's talking about not outward coaching, but am I walking my own talk? So what are some stories? You could have a story of your mentoring or being a mentor or mentee, learning journey, and how this competency has grown for you. Everyone with me? So instead of talking about someone else, you could talk about your journey. Now, this presupposes that you're actually walking your own talk as a coach. But you could explain that. You could have a story of how you learned to effectively receive and take action on feedback. I have a story where years ago, my boss came to me with feedback and I didn't take it well. So one of my examples is a story where I got incredibly defensive and I printed out all this code. My boss told me that I wasn't writing good code. So I printed out 3 feet of code and I put it on their desk and I said, show me where I didn't, where I coded poorly. That was not a good strategy. So that's a horrible story. But the point is, I used that as a backdrop to how quickly I learned, and it also talks about my journey from how broken I was to how much work I had to do. Counter stories when you failed to receive feedback. Stories of how you become more empathetic over time. Stories of why you do what you do. What is your ikigai, or what is your purpose in coaching? Would be something. Everyone with me? So from a self-mastery point of view, you could tell some stories of yourself. And that could be incredibly effective to connect to your clients. Now, you don't want to go into a coaching session and make it all about you. So you want to be opportunistic when you're picking your patterns or when you're picking your stories. I mean, there's thoughtfulness, right? There's appropriateness. There's thought. Is this the right time? Am I creating an opportunity for it? So you don't want to do any of this in excess. I don't think you want to be successful. Please don't go into your jobs and have someone reference you as a storyteller. So Enrico, I don't know what he is, but he's a great storyteller. You do not want people saying that. You want them saying, Enrico is a great Scrum Master, and he's a good storyteller as well. So in order to be effective in his role, or a great coach. So it's not about the stories themselves. It's about the influence it has for the role. It's about the communication. It's about the change effectiveness. Very often we're change agents. We're effective change. So if you're mentoring, another set of stories of your mentoring, stories of what worked for you. How did you learn what you've learned? All of you, who's the one mentor that's made the most impact in your life? Tell a story. How did you meet them? How did you ask them for that? What you're doing is sharing how important it is to ask permission and to find a mentor. Stories that map to your mentees' challenges and growth opportunities. And connecting to the mentees, connecting as a mentor. So you can draw on that. Now, you don't want to be telling stories that divulge confidences, right? I just wanted to say that. So you probably don't want to be talking about specific people so much, but generalize. So you want to change the names to protect the innocent, but capture the essence of the story. And I do that a lot. Coaching. This is, remember, where each one of these is a stance in the wheel. Everyone know what I mean? It's a competency in the wheel. So I'm just drilling into a few competencies to give you an idea of storytelling within the competency. From a coaching competency perspective, I love a story in the beginning. I think most clients don't know what professional coaching is and what it isn't. I.e., I don't know if most clients know what agile coaching is or wasn't it. We haven't done a great job of explaining or defining it. So I think one effective way to do that would be to hand them my book. I'm just kidding. But another effective way to do that would be to tell a story about what it is and what it isn't. Does that make sense to everyone? You could use storytelling as a backdrop for that. Uh, you could do a story about if a client said, well, I don't want to create an agenda. And we all know that creating an agenda is really important in a coaching conversation, and you're getting pushback. You could handle the pushback by just talking about a story of how an agenda made a positive effect, or how not having an agenda has really harmed some clients, and that's why you're pushing on it. So you could use storytelling as a way of explaining the value proposition of the agenda in the beginning of your coaching relationship with a team or with an individual. A story of very often as a coach, I think sometimes it can be powerful for you to share, to be vulnerable. So to share your vulnerability, not just a coach, I'm the coach and you are not. It's not a power dynamic. So in order to be vulnerable and level the power dynamic, you may share some vulnerable things, your failings, etc., or things you struggle with. To extend empathy, and a story format can be effective for that. And then the final stance, and I haven't talked about all of the stances, but the final stance that I wanted to explore is advising, providing advice. And some coaches are very uncomfortable with providing advice or telling a client what to do, telling a team what to do, telling a leader what to do. And I don't think that's what advice is. But you can have stories. I like sharing stories just of patterns. You know what? Let me share some stories, and I've seen this work. Here's some stories where this has worked. Here's some different ideas. Which one do you think would work here? So what I'm really using is stories to explain options. If that resonates with you, I'm using stories to unfold a few options. In my experience, I've seen this, and this work. I've also, here's something I've seen not work at all. Like sometimes I talk about in my vast experience, I've seen this work one time out of 100. So, and that's the one that the client is trying to choose. And it's okay for them to choose it, but I'm really talking about success patterns, failure patterns, and sharing these stories. And I'm not telling them what to do. That's not a good strategy. A direct experience, indirect experience. Well, I haven't done that, but I know 3 coaches that have had this experience. Let me share what I've heard from them. And I know them pretty well. Everyone get it? Stories within the context of what you want to do. Let me do a quick time check. What I'd like everyone to do, I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3 minutes. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. And what I want you to do is I want you to craft the key to storytelling, and I alluded to it earlier, is capturing story ideas or story snippets that you can then expand and practice later. But you need the nugget, the essence of an idea. What I want you to do, all of you to do, remember I said your personal why story is really important for you to have. If you don't have one, even if you have one that's dated, you need to be able to pull that out and tailor it to who you're talking to. My personal why for a team is different than my personal why to the CEO of a company. Does that make sense to everyone? Same story, but I'm targeting it differently. So I become more nimble at targeting. So what I want everyone to work on is take 3 minutes, and using some of the ideas I presented, I want you to jot down a sort of a nugget idea for your personal why. Everyone with me, you have 3 minutes to do that. Prepare. It's not the entire story. You're not writing it all out. You're writing a little outline for it, some nugget ideas. What would I use? What would be the opening move? What would be the end game? What would be the drop the mic? Things like that. All right, take 3 minutes. You have about a minute and a half left. Do a little deep dive. Maybe think about opening moves. What might be your opening joke? If you need one, if you want one. Or not. How are you going to show up? What is your mindset? Go deep on this. I want you to develop this. I actually want you to use this in real life. I want to inspire you to do that. About 30 seconds left. And then we'll close the workshop. And everyone said yes. I think the most important points are, like I said, I want you to keep that. I'd like you to practice it if you could. You try to practice your why. Look for opportunities to practice it. Look for opportunities to refine it, etc. Like I say on this slide, I'm looking for you to create a story snippet library, if you will. You don't need a lot. You don't need hundreds of them. Uh, you need maybe a handful. I probably have 10 to 25 stories that I regularly use in certain, in conference sessions, I use some set of stories. In coaching, I use another set of stories, but I don't have hundreds of them. Now, I do a lot of customization. So the nugget becomes different stories depending on who I'm talking to and what is the context. The one point that I didn't make that I want to leave with everyone, and then we have time for maybe a few questions. So if anyone has questions, just drop them in chat. That might be a good way to handle it, and we'll try to get to a couple. You want to weave yourself. Don't be shy about weaving yourself into your stories. So I do a lot of executive coaching and enterprise level coaching. And I grew up on a farm, a dairy farm in Pennsylvania in the States. And so I'm a farm boy. And I grew up milking cows and working on the farm and doing a lot of labor, hard labor at a very early age, etc. And that gave me my work ethic. That set the tone for who I am, a lot of who I am as a person. And I'll tell farm stories or I will weave some of that background into my stories. Does that make sense, everyone? I'm weaving myself into my stories. The more you can bring your insights into who you are, not just professionally, but who you are as a person, and weave it into the stories, that can be a magical addition. Weaving your passion in, weaving ideas about who you are into any story that you share. So let's see if there's any questions. I don't know if there are. It doesn't look like, I don't see any. Oh, Enrico, go ahead.
Right. So first of all, thank you. Thank you so much. It was quite amazing. And the last thing you said about weaving yourself in your stories made me, like, I remember that somebody said the same for like also stand-up comedy, that you cannot really make people laugh until you are inside your jokes. Like there is the real you. So maybe that's sort of related. But like
That's,
I have one point
go
because
ahead.
so what I try to do, like I always try to tell stories. I actually really like, probably love stories in general. Right now, I'm finding it a bit hard to deliver a message with a story, let's say in a room, because I noticed that sometimes, maybe many times, and maybe I'm personally struggling with it, the message is actually a bit delayed. You know, that you tell a story and people are like, okay, how does this relate directly to what we're seeing?
So Enrico, I'm going to use that as the close for this session because we're out of time.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really just a piece of advice. I don't have an answer, but it's a lovely, I'm glad you brought this up. Everyone, the question is, when are you done telling your story? Right? Is it just once or whenever? What I would say is you're done telling your story when other people are telling your story. So my point is you want to give space. You cannot determine when it lands. The universe determines, whoever you're delivering it to determines that. And a rule of thumb is if you have to tell it one time and people start talking about your story, you've done your job. If you have to tell it 20 times, if you have to tell it 200 times, if you have to tell it, I mean, there is an upper limit, but the point is our job as the storyteller does not control the reception. We cannot control reception time, but we can only control sort of storytelling time. And with that, I just appreciate everyone and hanging in here. So thank you for coming to this session. I hope you enjoyed the conference.